Welcome to Ask the Expert on Contingent Workforce Strategies LinkedIn group. It's the number one LinkedIn group talking about all things contingent, gig economy, future of work. And I got a really cool topic to talk about today, and it's something that is incredibly important in and happens in the most successful programs, but is often overlooked in most programs. And the topic today is from problem supplier to strategic partner, coaching your vendors and actually coaching buyers in a lot of cases to reduce waste and increase value in their programs. And I have an incredible person to talk about this topic. Pratik Patel, you are a well-known person in our industry. You've spoken on so many occasions, and it was amazing when we were talking that this topic came up because it's something that is so important because, as we've talked about, a lot of on the enterprise side, if they've got problem suppliers or issues, they'll just create more work for themselves and go to an RFP versus taking a step back, thinking about it, and working with their existing supply chain and coaching them to be better suppliers. So, Pratik Patel, you've got 23 years of overall procurement experience. The last 7 or 8, you've been focused really on the external workforce and indirect spend. You're an engineer. You still are an engineer. Sorry, you're an engineer by trade. You've been a consultant at Accenture, and then the last number of years you were running the program, the Contingent Workforce program at Mastercard, which is a global program, massive one. So thank you for taking the time today to talk about this because I think it's so important and that we talk about this to think about coaching your vendors or the buyer side on working together and optimizing things versus what's the old saying, throwing the baby out with the bathwater. So thanks again for coming on the show.
Hey Jeff, thanks so much, and thanks for this topic. So, first of all, I hope that this topic will create a level of inspiration for people who are facing problem suppliers today and reflecting on how can they have a help me, help you mentality. Because there's an investment that took place by the supplier to even be considered as part of the ecosystem for that buyer. And the buyer had a tremendous investment, both in terms of the process to get them onboarded, as well as getting the proper buy-in and support in their organization for that supplier. So there's a credibility component here. There's currency that has been consumed on both sides. So it is on both sides' interest to really understand the root cause of what the problem may be and how they can go about fixing it together. So I think it's a great topic, and I look forward to engaging with the audience and hopefully helping them and empowering them so that they don't face as many problem suppliers in the future.
Yeah, and it's so easy to point fingers, right? Because it's such a wide-ranging ecosystem. There's lots of different components and vendors in that ecosystem. And we're a society that loves to villainize people quickly and often play the victim too. It's not my fault, it's your fault, right? As opposed to taking a step back, thinking a little bit more holistically, and like you say, understanding that there was an investment there to bring on certain suppliers, time to build the ecosystem, all of that, and just throwing that away without really thinking about it and working together to optimize because both the buyers and organizations know sometimes when they're the problem, right? And what the issues are, but maybe not want to face the music and call themselves the problem. And then vice versa, there's never a surprise often. when a vendor gets cut from a program or something like that either. And so, it's so important, this topic. And like you say, that empowerment and the motivation to take the time, make some additional investment, but it'll a heck of a lot less than rerunning an RFP or switching out vendors, to work together to realign and understand what was working in the first place and then talk about what's not and figuring it out. So, you know, what are some of the key benefits that you found in this coaching suppliers or realigning when working with your vendors?
Yeah. So, Jeff, first and foremost, it's reducing waste.
Mm,
Waste is anything that your customer is not willing to pay for. So, how do you go about reducing that waste? Because whatever that interaction is that you are having, it's going to have an impact. Maybe it's impacting quality, the productivity, the efficiency. Maybe it's impacting the speed at what you need things to be done. Or maybe it is impacting cost, and cost that is now making you less competitive in the marketplace too. That is a lose-lose situation. So the number one benefit with getting in front of ever even having this perception of having a problem supplier is being able to have that open communication with the supplier and the buyer around what are your frustrations, what are maybe some leading indicators or lagging indicators that are showing up in the metrics that we can proactively approach so that we don't create the waste. That's number one, reduce the waste. Number two is reputation.
yeah,
Suppliers, absolutely, that's going to impact their reputation, but the buyer is also going to be impacted by their reputation inside the company, especially if they use their currency to bring in that supplier, because I'm sure that their business owners maybe had other suppliers in mind at the time when they started to use this problem
yeah,
supplier. So it's not good for the buyer either when they have to make a change like that. So it's really cohesive or conducive for both sides to get to come together, to have open communications and to even prevent that situation. So the governance model that you build is very important from that perspective. And then
oh, totally.
number three is you have to have a self-reflection. So one benefit is that you of acknowledging that you have a problem supplier is also an understanding that both sides have failed. So if you understand that you have failed, now you can reflect on what can you do differently in the future so that you don't have that same problem again. And it's not just with that supplier, but it's with any supplier
Yeah,
that you deal with, because that will create more efficiency for you as well from a buyer perspective to ensure that your suppliers are always aligned with what your expectations are and that your expectations are reasonable.
yeah,
And reasonable to me means that it's mandatory, it's realistic, and it's measurable as to what your expectations are, because then that's actionable for the supplier to be able to address.
yeah,
So if a buyer is not able to do at least those three things of providing what is mandatory, you must do this, what is realistic, because there's a precedent study that has been set, or this is what is expected inside our organization. So in our minds, our perception is this is realistic. The supplier has to come back and say if it's not realistic, then. And then the measurable piece, this is where a lot of programs fail as well. You have to have some leading and lagging indicators so that you don't have this perception of problem supplier. Because before you even get there, the flags are flying through
yeah,
the blazing. And it's like the alerts are happening, the alarms are sounding. You need to be thinking about how do we proactively get back to green?
yep.
And that's part of the governance piece too.
Well, it was really interesting. The best programs were always the most open ones, talking about these things that you're talking about as a best practice. And the benefit to the buyer often is suppliers that are not, you're not only reducing the waste, you're the supply and you're continue to reduce waste because the suppliers, if they're comfortable and trust that they're going to win enough business from you, they will be more reasonable on the pricing. They will make sure the service is incredibly high because there's respect and a good relationship there. And I don't want to say it's personal because it always is business at the end of the day, but we are in the people business. And if you build trust with your suppliers that you're going to help them and coach them back if they're and tell them if they're not doing well and work with them versus always ruling over fear and that you're just going to get cut from the program, they're going to make sure that you're looked after, right? And tends to be a longer term, very stable relationship from that perspective. And as in any long term relationship, there's ups and downs, and you have to work through those ups and downs. From a buy side or from the supplier side, you're going to win more business, right? If you have more communication. And I think it's just a cyclical benefit to all when you work together like that.
Jeff, I think you're bringing up a great point. And if I can elaborate a little bit on what you're sharing, and maybe kind of translate it in a little bit different way around what does this enable?
Yeah.
When when we're working more collaboratively together, when the supplier has a level of trust that there is value that they're being able to drive and there is a reciprocation of that value, then the supplier is absolutely going to be focused in bringing the buyer along on a journey towards the vision of why that supplier exists.
Yeah.
And every single business, it doesn't matter what it is, should have a vision for why they exist and the comparative or competitive advantage that they can help generate for their customer. But to get to that vision, which is a pursuit in a sense towards perfection, that supplier is on that journey towards that vision. Their customers are further down on that journey, but there's different phases that you go through in that vision. And so, as a customer, when you're going through those phases, those suppliers are willing to make investments into you as well. And so, it's not just about fixing this perception of a problem supplier, it's about enabling the customer to be able to gain more value. And the enablement piece is where the customer has to be willing to allow that to take place
Yeah.
and enable the system in their organization so that they can get the best overall, not the best, but optimized value from that supplier. So it's about the supplier being able to execute the vision and the buyer allowing that to happen. So I just thought I'd share that perspective.
Yeah, I love it. And when I think about overall, the suppliers that you're working with, and you mentioned in the early days from a buy side, the credibility internally. The suppliers you're working with are a reflection of you and are your ambassadors. And making sure they have the tools, the knowledge, the understanding of what your expectations are, help them be better ambassadors for you. Because, when you set up governance and rules and things like that, they're often your key allies in enforcing the rules in a program, right? Because they know the policy, they know this, they know that. The managers are infrequent users often and need guidance. And if they're working with you as a supplier, if you can help them guide, that's helping your buyer who brought you into the program do a better job as their ambassador, right? So
Oh,
so
absolutely.
important.
They are an advocate for your policies and procedures and process that you have and educating the internal customers around that when they're interacting with them as well. because the internal customers will have a need. And if they have a need and they go to that supplier, maybe you're in a vendor neutral program, that supplier is then going to say, hey, I'm happy to share help fulfill your need, but there is a process. If I can, let me share with you what that process is. That helps build credibility. That also helps build trust. If it's not a vendor neutral program, let's say it's an SOW, right? Then that supplier, and I always try to do my part to educate the supply base around what our process is, why it exists, and how it benefits them as well. And so then they do become that influencer, that advocate with those business owners, because you're not always there in that conversation, so that there's a level of compliance where all parties are kind of tooting to the same horn because it's driving efficiency and managing risk along the way.
100%. And I think it's taking a long-term vision as a supplier versus the short term. Because it's always easy to take a wreck and run with it and close the one deal, right? And don't share the process and don't share and don't be that ambassador of the program. But when you do that, actually, you start to become the problem supplier because you're not acting as that true partner, right? And strategic partner and making things more efficient. It's thinking about short-term profit versus long-term profit, which is a lot more abundant than one rec here, one rec there that you got a body in, right? And so that's a mindset I think that a lot of suppliers need to think about and salespeople at suppliers have to think about often too to say, whoa, if I take the long term approach, that may make sense. But, you know, that's one of the potential symptoms. But there's other challenges and obstacles like in mindset, in the way they do business, what their products are, all of these things that potentially could put them in that problem category as well as the buyers have challenges and obstacles. So, can you talk about some of the things you've seen or experienced in terms of how suppliers act that make them the problem child, right? Or even on the buy side, how they become the problem customer, right? And they aren't optimizing the partnerships.
Yeah, let's talk about both. And let's talk about maybe three components for each one, right? So when you think about from the seller side, the supplier, you're a problem when you don't follow the process. And if you don't understand the process, ask questions. And if the buyer is not receptive to the questions that you're asking, then you have to still kind of be diligent about maybe going back to the business owner and saying, hey, I want to support you properly. I'm trying to get clarity around this point. I've been trying to work with this person to get that, but can you help me? Can use those business owners as ambassadors when you're trying to do the right thing. So that's number one, is when the process is not being followed and suppliers are trying to be proactive in following it, but maybe not getting the support that they need to. And how do you
Yeah.
go about it? Number two is be proactive in terms of where you see waste. You can become a problem supplier just because you become complacent
Yeah.
in that organization. You need to continue to be proactive. You need to continue to show where you can drive value. And if the receptiveness is not there from that side, then you have to at least help the buyer understand that, hey, I've been supporting you for a couple of years now. We love this program. We hope we're driving value for you. But if you allow me, I would love to be able to share a few things that I think could further optimize this program for you. And this is how we can do it, and this is the benefit it can provide you.
Oh, yeah.
You will gain so much more credibility and trust with that buyer then. Because
100%. Because, markets ebb and flow, innovation happens, trends happen, different things that you know, are happening in the marketplace, if you're aware of them, bring them to your customer in the discussions so that you know, because they're looking at you as a consultant, as an expert, as much as you are as a person placing a body, right? Yes, that is the transactional value that you're bringing is getting a bum in a seat to do a job at a good price in a timely manner. But there's more to building that relationship and bringing value to your customers.
Absolutely. And then number three, I think that is a problem from a supplier perspective is when the supplier is, how do I say this? They're causing friction when they don't know they're causing friction in the process. And it's not even the process, but it's inside the organization.
Yeah.
So they're meaning well with what they're doing. They're trying to demonstrate the value. They're making proper investments. Um, but what they're actually doing is hurting more than helping. And it's when they don't know that, that's the problem. So that's number one for the buyer side, is
Yeah.
when the friction is happening in your organization, you need to be that conduit with that supplier and make them aware that there is friction that is being created with what you're doing. And I want you to know what that is and how do we eliminate it, or how do we take what you want to do and make it into a positive outcome that actually reduces friction?
Yeah. Grease that wheel and build the
Yes.
relationships in the and streamlining processes, right? To make sure that the outcome is a smooth one and has the results you're looking for and was expected versus maybe not being timely, being too expensive, different aspects, right?
Yeah, because you're probably familiar with, Jeff, the iceberg theory, right? So the icebergs, usually you see very little of the iceberg above the water. It's usually much deeper below the water. And so it's below the water. Those are the things that become the problem supplier. And so but you don't know what you don't know. And
Yeah.
you need the buyer to help you. So, like I said, number one is that buyer to be able to communicate when friction exists.
Hmm.
Number two, the buyer needs to be proactive with the suppliers in terms of how can we all create this help me help you mentality.
Yeah.
The supplier, I think, in general, as a part of a sales organization, I would hope like that's something that's always on their mind is how can I help the buyer, and in turn that will help me grow more sales.
Yeah.
But the buyer may not be thinking as much about how can I help the supplier. And in helping the supplier, that's going to enable me to gain more value. And that will then help my organization.
Yeah. And so
So,
you see that often, that kind of, and for lack of a better term, a diva mentality, right? Because it is pretty cool when all of a sudden lots of people want to have lunch with you and give you tickets to ball games and, gifts and things like that. And it feels really cool. And it feels like you're the cool kid or you know, the captain of the football team, etc. You're in such demand, and ego sometimes gets into the equation versus sometimes logic, let's call it. And you start to think, well, there's a dime a dozen. These suppliers are a dime a dozen. There's so many people knocking on my door. I can replace you tomorrow. So you kind of become diva-like, for lack of a
mhm.
better term, and you get demanding of your supply base and kind of rule through fear in some cases. So, have you seen some of that and some other challenges that maybe the buyers create?
Yeah, but can I share number three with the buyer first? Because I
Yes.
always like to have 3 points of view on the seller and the buyer side too. So, and then we could talk about that. But I think number three on the buyer side is a little bit of that non-diva-like component, right? Which is leaning in around this is our overall objective as an organization. This is what the 3-year roadmap looks like. Now tell me, as a supplier, how can you fit into this roadmap and drive value, further value? So that is beyond the help me help you, because the help me help you is around like more shorter term kind of elements about maybe cost, quality, speed, that type of thing. But it's more about, hey, I want to be able to expand my supply base beyond India, where you're getting offshoring from. And I want to look at Africa, or I want to look at other markets. I want you to help me build a more resilient sub ecosystem for my organization. I want you to help me become more sustainable. So I want to know, how can you help me get to net zero? Because that's what our goal is. What are you doing to do that? So it's the longer term components that sometimes we forget about. That if the buyer took a more proactive stance in sharing what's their longer term strategy that they want to help execute, then you eliminate waste along the way to be able to get there. If you're all aligned around that this is the end goal, now let's collaboratively work together to get there. So it's a little bit of an expansion on Help Me Help You, because you could definitely
Yeah.
use it in that manner. But to me, Help Me Help You is more about eliminating or mitigating the risk of a problem supplier, whereas the long-term component is the partnership part, like you're talking
Yes.
about, right? How do you enable that partnership? But if you want me to talk about Diva, I'm happy to do that. But I wanted to at least share that perspective.
No, and those are very important points, right? Because once again, the the day-to-day activities, the transactional stuff should be kind of the table stakes, right? It's when you collaborate as true partners, you can do amazing things as well as you're doing the day-to-day transactional work. And I think everybody benefits from that, right? That partnership, the sharing of um, proper expectations, the sharing of process, the understandings, so that everybody can align, right, around that. The interesting part, though, is when we talk about that potential diva mentality, is treating suppliers kind of like commodity. And I think that also is a little bit of a, we talked about building trust and respect. You have to understand salespeople and suppliers have a business to run. They're human too. They've got a job to do. And sometimes, you know, that's forgotten in this whole kind of process, right? Because it is tough when also it feels good to have 100 people calling you, but it is also stressful to have 100 people calling you every day, right? And so figuring out ways from the buy side to take a step back and say, hey, listen, these people are human too. I'm going to make it my, mission to collaborate with them, give feedback to suppliers that we just don't have capacity to bring in new people, and then work with the ones we're dealing with that instead of cutting them, let's work with you, right? Back into a partnership approach.
Yeah, I think you're making some great points, Jeff. One thing I would share is you have to establish boundaries, rules, and expectations
Love it.
when it comes to prospects that are engaged with you. I had my templates that I would have, right, where I would try to give them enough information that would help them understand where our position is and why our position is where it is. Because I look at every prospect as a potential customer of
Yeah.
what my company is selling out there.
Yeah.
And so I want to create the best brand image in that interaction as well. So if you go in with that mentality as the buyer, that everybody that's interacting with you could potentially buy your goods or service, or maybe them not directly, but their family members, their friends, you never know, right? Then you need to be kind of thinking about how do you build something that allows you to be able to maintain that brand image, but gives a little bit of nuggets back to them. And it doesn't have to be customized. It can be continuously the same template that you're sharing, but the template has to have meaning behind it as to what it is that you're trying to do. So that's one thing that I would
Brilliant.
share,
Yeah.
right, from my
Brilliant.
standpoint. The other thing that I would share, Jeff, is that um, when you think about it, because there's two elements to this problem supplier. There's a problem supplier of prospects. There's a problem supplier of existing suppliers in your
Yes.
ecosystem too, right? Those suppliers in your ecosystem, they're always want to gain more and more business. And they maybe are not a problem supplier for what you brought them in for. And they're doing a great job. But they're becoming a problem supplier as they try to grow further in the organization. And that's kind of like an example of the friction piece, where they're
Yeah.
creating friction when they shouldn't be even have to do that. Um, so there needs to be an alignment around expectations of what growth can look like and a pathway that both parties can work towards. Because in order to enable growth, it's going to require the buyer on their side too, to be able to have those conversations internally and to create the space for that supplier to grow. Yes, organic growth can occur, and maybe growth can occur in companies just by push, push, push. But I would hope that more and more companies are becoming more mature in how they manage their spend. And with maturity comes more boundaries in terms of policies, procedures, expectations
Yeah.
as well. So I just thought I'd share that perspective
No,
too.
I love that. And I know we've talked about some of the obstacles and issues, and a lot of we've started in talking about the solutions and some best practices, but really want to kind of jump into the best practices in a little bit maybe more tangible way, right? That people can take away some of these nuggets of gold tomorrow and say, I'm going to do this, right? And so when it comes to some of the best practices around coaching suppliers, what have you seen in terms of kind of making it more systematic? You mentioned even, you know, I love the mindset of somebody calling me might be a buyer of our services as a company too. So having that, you want to create a great brand image. And I know in talent acquisition, a big topic is employment brand. So you want to attract the best talent. You got to have
Mhm.
a really good employment brand, a great employee experience or a candidate experience. So, taking that kind of mindset, what have you seen as some of the best practices around making it more systematic and creating an environment where you're able to coach some of these suppliers back from the brink, or even just improvement, like you say, and grow, they may not be a problem supplier, but we want to help them groom them and grow them within the
Yep.
organization.
So first and foremost, it's an intentionality around a cadence that you have. So for example, I had an all hands call with my supply base every 2 to 3 months. And we would go over kind of what are we doing today? What are we focused on over the next year? What is our objectives? What are some of the areas that we're challenged with today? But also create an environment during those all hands calls where they can openly share what are some of their problems that they're facing. Many of them wouldn't do it because I had 100 plus on the call.
Yeah,
So,
yeah,
but at the same time, we would also do instant surveys during the calls to get a pulse and an understanding right there on the call, where people would take the polls, right, and be able to
yeah,
understand how are people thinking about these different things. It's anonymous, and it gives us an idea of how we can further lean in to help support the supply base. So that's number one. Be intentional. My top suppliers, they know that I would have meetings with them every month. So at least every month we're talking. And we're not just talking about, hey, how's it going? We're talking about what's working, what what are your frustrations? Because I might start off the conversation with my supply base with what frustrations and concerns do you have? How can I help alleviate them?
Brilliant. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Like
That's a
we
nugget
start
of
off
gold
with
right
that.
there
Yeah.
is eat some humble pie and ask
Yeah.
about your supply base before you get into what you need, right?
Yeah.
Ask what
There'll
they need.
never be a problem supplier then because you're flushing those things out right away. And it'll be interesting to know what are they sharing that you're also maybe hearing from other internal customers. You always want two sides of a story as well. You're getting the internal story, you want their story too. So let's see if they bring up the similar topics, especially if there are issues that came up during that month because it's always important to get the full context. Let's not jump to conclusions, right? The third thing I think from a best practice, or I guess that's still intentional. So that's maybe the first piece,
Yeah.
right? The second piece, I think, is having a process, disciplined process that you follow, that your suppliers also understand are in alignment with as well and you enable an opportunity for them to push back if they feel like that process causes waste. Because it's not just waste for you, it's waste for them. We don't want waste for anybody in whatever process that we built. So that's number two.
Yep.
And then number three is getting back to that vision and strategy. Treat the supplier as your ultimate and like it is your partner in crime and your crime is waste, it's optimization, it's getting to optimization. So understanding from a buyer perspective, what's your vision? What are you trying to do? Where right now? If we're at the beginning of it, that's okay. Tell me that. What do we need to do to get to the next phase? What value can we get from that? What do we need to enable to make that happen? Like I said, you got to create the space, but to create the space, you need the business case for why you need to create the space.
Yeah.
So understanding the vision of why the supplier exists and the supplier to also understand maybe the strategies and objectives of what you're trying to do.
And are there ways to provide feedback and data? Because at scale, sometimes it's hard to take a really personal approach. Is there ways to measure and provide feedback systematically so that they can start to understand they may are the problem? Is it feedback mechanisms from, you know, your managers? Is it metrics? Is it data? Like,
It's
what
all
are
of the
some of these
above.
things? Yeah.
It's all of the above,
Yeah.
what you just
Yeah.
shared, right? It's managers, absolutely, because they're going to be the ones that hopefully you've created a comfortable environment where they can always feel free to always share feedback because they know that you're going to act on it. Because until you demonstrate a level of credibility and trust that you're going to act on that feedback, sometimes you're just going to have hesitancy of people internally even giving you that feedback,
Yeah.
right? So that is absolutely one element is going to be that voice of customer that you get. The and verbal or text or whatever, right? Different communications to get that to you. The second is going to be the metrics. The metrics is about what is it that you're measuring. Less is more. We always have to understand that. Sometimes people feel like, oh, let me just go and capture all of these different data. Are you really going to have time to analyze all of that data and to be able to act on it? Because whatever you're measuring, you should be able to act on it. And if you can't, then you have to challenge why you're even measuring it.
Yeah.
And then the third element could be surveys, but at the same time, I'm not a fan of that because there's a low participation level, and to get a higher participation level takes quite a bit of effort. And to me, there's a diminishing return in
Yeah.
terms of the effort involved versus the results that you gain back from that. But the third element is really about proactive seeking of information. both from your internal stakeholders, um, and that can just be coffee talk.
Yeah.
That can be maybe a monthly cadence that you have where maybe you're going over these are the renewals that are coming up. Let's understand, what the potential issues are with those suppliers. And then at the same time, you can talk about, okay, are there any other issues with any of the other suppliers? Because maybe there's an opportunity for us to even further grow with this renewal, with this supplier that can give us more leverage to be able to get a better overall value from them. And in the process, um, we can also then take that opportunity to say, hey, other supplier, we're seeing this, this, and this with you. And if you don't fix these things, then you are going to lose business because we're in the process of doing renewal negotiations with your competitors. And part of that is we're going to be talking about expansion of business. That is absolutely going to create a fire
Yep.
inside the existing supplier to make whatever changes you need to as well.
100%. And from a buyer perspective, what are some of the things that you would say are some best practices from their they could do better in building those partnerships? So, you know, even just a mindset to interaction best practices to helping, if you understand the perspective of a supplier is looking to run a profitable business, grow market share, whatever that is, are there things you can do to help that as well? So how do you coach a buyer on the best practices of coaching and helping create an environment of partnership?
Yeah, so I think that there's a common theme around what I'm going to share with you. It's communication.
Yeah.
So communication is the common theme, but then there's three components of communication that I think buyers should be kind of looking at. Number one is absolutely share what your frustrations, your concerns are, where you think that that supplier is lacking. Be open and honest about it. Be candid about it. Share that with them. Number two is give them ammunition so that they can go back into their organization. Maybe they're doing a great job, but there's more that can be done. So, what is that value that they could be bringing that they're not bringing today? That those suppliers absolutely want to go back into their organization and share why they should make the investments. So, give them the ammunition that they can take back inside their organization for the seller organization. And then number three is talk about trends with the seller. The seller talks about trends with the buyer. There's not enough buyers talking about trends with the seller. And the
Yeah.
trends that the buyers can talk about is maybe what they're seeing from their peers that they want to be able to implement. It may be what is important inside their organization that they're hearing from the business. Maybe the business is saying that, hey, this company Databricks, there's more and more that's happening with Databricks. And, I know we're using Snowflake, but I've heard a lot more about how Databricks can add value, but I'm concerned about the talent base that can be helped that is skilled around using Databricks, just as an example, right?
Yeah.
So whatever that trend was, and that would have been a trend that was like 3 years ago, right? That somebody could have been talking about because today it's too late by
Yeah.
that point. Talk about skill sets that you as a company are looking for and are having a tough time filling even full time. Like enable them, open the door for them so that they can have that value. And these are the things, Jeff, that we haven't talked about yet, but I have a company now because I'm now on my own, building up my own business. And my company's name is called Leanergize to enable lean with an energy and a mindset to become optimized. And as a part of this, I'm helping sales organizations in terms of better understanding buyer mindset. Buyer mindset is the buyer psychology. It's about how can you better resonate with the buyer? How can you drive more efficiency in that buyer seller communication? I'm also helping them with bottom line cost. How do you improve your margin percentage with bottom line cost efficiency? Cost of a lead, cost of a conversion. If you can drive more efficiency with that, if you can drive more efficiency with where your top spends are, but then there's also on the buyer side the same thing. I can
Yeah.
help buyer organizations as it relates to maturity, understanding problem suppliers. How do we eliminate problem suppliers from ever happening in the future? So I wanted to at least share that perspective that
Big
everything
time.
I'm sharing with you is not just things that people can take away. If they want to have a further conversation, I'm more than happy to on how I can enable it for them.
Oh, in a big way. And we've had some really amazing conversations, and I always look forward to chatting about your passion and hearing more about your passion about creating lean, reducing waste, optimizing situations, right? But we only have usually about 30 minutes, 25, 30 minutes. And we got to start to wrap this up. And there's been so many nuggets of gold in the conversation around this, but I think we have to think about the practical next steps. So I always wrap things up with, hey, if I'm running a contingent program today, and I'm thinking about this topic of coaching suppliers versus, we saw so many RFPs over the last couple of years, and a lot of them didn't even follow through on the RFPs. And that was a lot of work to go through on both sides, right? The buyer to send out an RFP and the levels of approvals, discussions, everything you have to send out that RFP, and then to try to get it across the board afterwards is massive undertaking. And vice versa, it's a huge undertaking for the supply base to respond to all these RFPs, especially if there is a perception that it may not actually mean anything because there are incumbents that are good, but there may be some displeasure with them for some reason as the problem suppliers. So, when you're thinking about this topic as a buyer, what are some really immediate actions or practical things they can look at to avoid throwing the baby out with the bathwater or all this extra effort of going through a reevaluation when they could have just had conversations?
Absolutely. To your point, conversations. Number one, be intentional about creating a cadence. That cadence doesn't have to be with each and every supplier. It can be where you're establishing an all hands call. So get your full supplier list, get an all hands call, and say, guys, I want us to be better together. What can we do to be better together? Give me ideas, give me thoughts on where you think we could be better. Be vulnerable, show humility as a buyer.
Yeah.
I think that will really open it up. And that's something you can do today if you're not doing it already. Go set up an all hands call. You'd be surprised at the feedback you get from your buyer, from your
Yeah.
sellers,
Yeah.
from your suppliers. So that's number one. And number two is look at who you would deem to be a problem supplier. That's a defect, right? From a Six Sigma perspective,
Yeah.
you want to understand where you have defects because that then helps you understand root cause and then to reflect on what that root cause is. And if you don't understand what that root cause truly is, then investigate. Use your suppliers, use your internal teams, do the five whys, understand the who, what, when, where, and why and how. Do fishbone diagrams. There's so many different ways that you can do root cause analysis. Get on top of it today on what you think that is. And then number three, just be proactive. Be proactive in those communications with suppliers. Be proactive in those communications with the business so that you can truly understand where maybe there are frustrations bubbling up with the business that's not above the iceberg right now.
I can't say enough. Pratik, it's been amazing conversation, and I know we could, like, I have other questions in my head that I want to ask you because there's just so much knowledge and experience. And that's where I think it's incredible that you're sharing your knowledge as a consultant now and running a business because I think you've experienced things and proactively sought out with a curious mind to create those experiences and
Yep.
situations. And in some cases they worked well, in some cases they didn't work. But guess what? Each time you did and went out and did it, you learned from those experiences to create a better outcome the next time around. And so I think your advice to say go out and do it, have your hands up, all hands on deck call right away, just do it is such an important enabler and inspiration. So I can't thank you enough for the time and the nuggets of gold you've shared. And I know we'll have to do another conversation soon.
Thanks so much, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity, and I hope we encourage people to be empowered because everybody, suppliers and buyers, both need to look at that, right? They need to be looking at how they can empower others. That's how we all get better together. And through this conversation, hopefully there's a level of inspiration that has taken place too, where people want to take action.
Perfect. Thanks again.
Thank you.